changed everything and changed your life forever. You know, and then, you know, the series has continued. There's been spin-off series. HBO is now launching a third spin-off series. It's called A Night of the Seven Kingdoms.
Yay!
It was first published as a novella. What was the title? When was the novella?
The Hedge Knight was the first novella. The Hedge Knight, and then there were two more, The Sworn Sword and The Mystery Knight, and we hope to adapt those two. And if the first one, Night of the Seven Kingdoms, is successful.
What can you tell us about Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and what's your level of involvement?
I had published A Game of Thrones, and I had a 3-book contract, and I was working on the second volume in the series, which would eventually be published as A Clash of Kings. That was the first indication that there was difficulties ahead, because I had sold a trilogy that would consist of 3 books: A Game of Thrones, and what was the second? It was a Game of Thrones, The Dance with Dragons, and anyway, there were 3. And of course, I blew the deadline, as I never want to do. And I had, you know, a lot of fantasy books. And fantasy has always been kind of large books. Tolkien said that thing too. And they were about 800 pages in manuscript, I think. And I'm writing Game of Thrones, and I just sail right past 800 pages, 900 pages, 1,000 pages. I'm not even close to the end. Oh God, I can't finish this in time. And yes, I finished this character, this character, this character, but I haven't even started this character or that character. So at that point, I said, yeah, my trilogy will be 4 books.
What did Douglas Adams say about Hitchhikers? He said the increasingly misnamed Hitchhikers Galaxy trilogy. It was like the 6th book or something.
Yeah, Gene Wolfe, a genius fantasist who I was in some writers' workshops with when we both lived in Chicago, he had his trilogy that we were reading in the writers' workshop. It just became 4 volumes, and he didn't blink, and no one else blinked, but I do it too. Anyway, so I rearranged my plans, and I moved some stuff that was going to be in Game of Thrones into A Clash of Kings, and I'm writing now A Clash of Kings, which wasn't part of the original deal. And of course, I'm running late on it, and as I had a want to do. And Robert Silverberg, I'm sure many of you know Robert Silverberg. He's one of the great science fiction writers, Grandmaster from SFWA. Been writing since the 50s. He was the youngest guy ever to win a Hugo. I think he won a Hugo with Best New Writer when he was 18 years old. Pretty damn impressive. But also a great editor. He had done the New Dimension series. He had edited for Science Fiction Writers America. He edited one of their Hall of Fame books. And he had sold an anthology idea. He had edited original anthologies before with the New Dimensions line. But this was going to be an epic fantasy thing. And he contacted 10 gigantic best-selling writers of epic fantasy. And they were all going to write original stories set in their particular universes. Because one of the things about epic fantasy is that world building is very essential. You know, you're not just writing a story. You know, Tolkien created Middle-earth, and you know, he wrote a number of stories set there. And other people have done it and created even more stories. Yeah. So the 10 writers were invited. Silverberg got a very, very nice advance for that. You know, I don't know how many of you know how publishing works, but anthology, you sell a book, you get an advance, and you pay the writers from that, and what you don't give to the writers, you get to keep for yourself. And so Silverberg invited me to be in it. Now, that was, number one, I was very happy with that because I had an enormous amount of respect for Silverberg and the books he edited. He was a great editor. He never published third-rate material. It was good stuff. And so being included in this with these other people. But, you know, I think I said a minute ago that he included in this 10 huge best-selling writers. Actually, he included 9 huge best-selling writers and me. And I was, you know, I was not unknown. I was not a kid off the street. I had won Hugos, I had won Nebulas, I had lost Hugos, and lost Nebulas, and I published dominantly in the 70s. A few fantasy stories, but mostly science fiction stories, occasionally horror stories. You know, there was this period where horror was very, very hot. It had to do with some guy from Maine. His books were like huge. And everybody else was trying to write his books. And I went to a bookstore, and it was all paperbacks with black covers and dripping blood, literally. So I had one of those, but so I said, sure, I'd be glad to do an anthology. Now, I hadn't even finished the second book in the series. So now that I'm in this book and I have to deliver a novella for it to be in this book with the 9 very prominent writers, it was like, well, what the hell am I going to write about? It has to be a Westeros book, or it can't be a sequel because I haven't finished the main story yet. I can't write what's happening to Jon Snow or Tyrion or Dany or anybody after the series. I got several more books to write in the series. I don't want to give away, so it has to be a prequel. But that's fine because I had a lot of, in my head, I had a lot of stuff about Targaryen history, some half-formed, some pretty definitely formed. So I looked at all of the eras that I had sort of roughed out, and I picked the era that the Duncan Egg stories were in, and I wanted to tell, you know, if you're publishing stories, you're going to get reviews. Not so much in those days as it is now, when there's all these annoying people on the internet. But you would get reviews, and you'd read them, and or you wouldn't read them. You know, I have a number of friends, other writers who say, I never, ever, ever read my reviews. I consider those liars. I would believe that for a fucking minute. But one of the things that one of the reviews had said about my book, generally positive reviews, said, look, here's another fantasy about kings and wizards and lords and knights and they're fighting for a throne. And it's pretty well done, but we don't need any more of these things, do we? Nobody ever writes about the small people, the small folk, as I call them, the peasants. Yeah, that's kind of true. Maybe I should do a story, this prequel, I should do a story about a guy who's not a lord or not a king, and he's not anyone's bastard son. He's just a guy growing up and wondering where his next meal is going to come from. And so somehow the characters of Duncan Egg came to me, and I started writing the story that became the hedge knight, which is a term I'd used before, you know, for a knight who was just, who always head wizards and head doctors in your medieval history, and hedge knight was just a step on that. What happened though is I'm writing this story, and as I always do, I'm struggling with it, and I'm late. And Silverberg has a deadline at the end of the year, and we're in like September or something, and he sends me an email saying, I hear that you're way behind on your book. You couldn't fit the whole one in, and you had to do another book, and now you're late on that one. This anthology got a really big advance, and the publisher is very serious about wanting it in by the last day of the year. I cannot be late, because then they'll take some money away or something like that. So I'm going to have to drop you from the series, because I hear you're running late. instead of just weekly saying, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I look at my contract, which we'd already signed. Wait a minute. You can drop me from the book if I'm late, but I'm not late yet. So you can't drop me from the book, or if you did, you'd have to pay me all this money. So I insisted that I remain in the book, and I continued to write the Hitchhiker. Silverberg had actually already replaced me. I don't know with who, but that's why if you look at Legends 1, which was the book that finally came out, it has 11 stories in it. There was some guy who came off the bench and wrote a story. But I got in the Hedge Night. I finished it like barely in time. That week between Christmas and New Year's, I was going fucking crazy. But I got the story to him on the last day of the year. Barely meeting the deadline. The interesting thing about that is like 2-3 other writers also got their stories done the last day. So I may have been the one that they were worried about, but I wasn't the only one who was doing that. But Legends 1, or just Legends, was, I think, an amazing book. And not only did it have Hedge Knight in it, but it had an original Robert Jordan story. It had an original Anne McCaffrey story about dragons. It had original stories by a number of the great great fantasy writers of the age, all set in their established university, and it had a couple stories by this Stephen King guy. I don't remember how he got into that book, but
yeah, I've read all his books, and I've always wondered what happened to him. They're going so well, it's promising future.
I know. It was great. Anne McCaffrey was did any of you read any of Annie was a very talented writer. She was the first woman to win a Hugo for fiction, and I think a Nebula too. She sold her dragon books to John W. Campbell initially for.
And in a way, she set the stage for Iron Flame and all the dragon books that sort of, that have been so successful in just the last couple of years.
And Annie's books sold very, very well. She was a best-selling writer, but she moved to Dublin, I think, and lived the rest of her life there. She was trying to get the rest of us to move to Ireland. We were tempted.
Why didn't we listen to her?
Ireland had no income tax on writers. Whoa! Why didn't we all move there?
They also created the universal basic income for artists. That's not so.
But Anne's first dragon story was Weird Search, which John W. Campbell published in Astounding. And that's a science fiction magazine. So, and her dragons, they're dragons, but they're telepathically connected with their riders, and they live on another planet, far, far distant planet in another corner of the galaxy. So Anne would always say for years, I don't write fantasy, I write science fiction. I'm a science fiction writer. These are science fiction stories. Until Silverberg sold that Legends anthology, and who was paying such a big advance? And I said, yeah, here's a fantasy story.